What's up, guys and girls? It's Vision, and today I'm going to be going over my Roid Mage, Skeleton, Archmage, Necromancer build. Let's go ahead and start with how this build works. Basically, this build works around having one Skeleton Mage with the Archmage node, so you're putting all of your power into one minion, and this makes it a lot easier to keep track of as a Necromancer. You're not managing a bunch of minions and watching the top of bar to see, oh, do I have all my skeletons? Do I have all my mages? You have one mage. It's very easy to babysit, and all of the rest of your skills revolve around buffing up this one single mage. And we're doing that with Infernal Shade for increased attack speed, cast speed, move speed, permanent haste, Dread Shade giving a lot of more damage, also attack speed, buffing up the damage of the mage with Dread Shade, Chaos Bolts giving flat damage based on your maximum mana, and you'll see that's a theme through this build too, is your own maximum mana is also working to buff up this mage. So this whole build revolves around this one ultra juiced up minion, and it's pretty easy. So let's bring this mage over here. It gets a little excited. Let's look at the pros and cons of this build. Pro number one, low maintenance. Like I said, you're not managing a bunch of minions, so it's really easy to just babysit this one minion. Your Infernal Shade is always on the mage. It's permanent duration, so you don't have to refresh this. Dread Shade, you have to put it on every 20 seconds, but this is easily maintained and watched because you'll see down here, you can tell when your Dread Shade is on the target. So as long as your Dread Shade's up, this little buff icon is down here. Every 20 seconds this falls off, you just have to put it on. Pretty simple to do. And then you're also managing a 13-second cooldown from, or a 13-second buff from Revolution in Chaos Bolts tree, which is giving it flat mana and cast speed based on your maximum mana. And you can see when the mage has this buff based on this glowing aura around its feet. So really, the most you have to do is once every 13 seconds, cast your Chaos Bolts. Every 20 seconds, put on your Dread Shade. But other than that, there's not a lot you have to do with this build. Keep your buffs up, and then walk your mage through a map or to a boss. Just give it something to attack, and that's all you have to do for this. Take a look here at pro number two. Great screen-wide AoE. Your mage is always shooting into a cone, and so there's whatever direction it's facing, there's a lot of damage going in that direction. A lot of times in Monolith, when you're running through the maps, you can run ahead of your mage and its projectiles are following you, clearing the screen as you run. Another good thing about this is your minion is immortal unless it's one shot. How we do this, Dread Shade is always giving your minion crit. See down here, minion always crits as long as it has Dread Shade. And when your Skeleton Mage crits, it heals for 15% of its max HP. And with the way that, how fast this thing attacks, as long as it's attacking, every blast here, healing for 15% of its max HP. And that's kind of how you also sustain the health cost of the Dread Shade and the Infernal Shade. Basically, as long as your mage doesn't get one shot, you don't have to worry about resummoning it. Sometimes you might run into issues in Monolith where you go for a large gap or a large space where there's not a lot of enemies to attack. When that happens, your mage can die too, just because it doesn't have anything to leech off of. Another pro of this build, satisfying progression and damage scaling with with better gear. And this is one of the builds that I've played where every single piece of gear or equipment you upgrade, you can really feel it with this build. There's a lot of inner working ways to scale this build through your own max mana, giving flat damage to the mage through Chaos Bolts. Also, the mage benefits from your own max mana up here with Forbidden Arcana, giving more damage per mana. So anytime you get an upgrade with mana, you can feel that. Anytime you get spell damage, minion spell damage, through like suffixes or the Lich's Scorn, you feel that too every time those numbers go up. Anytime you get minion health, you can kind of see like, oh, my mage isn't really losing health that much anymore, or my mage can survive this many hits now without getting killed. The gear progression for this build is very satisfying. You can feel every piece of gear that you get. Cons of this build. There's some buff management, but as you've seen, it's not very intense. 20 seconds for Dread Shade, 13 seconds for the Chaos Bolt Revolution buff. Minion AI can be a little frustrating, and you'll see that a lot with this build. The mage goes so fast that it gets a little excited. And maybe you've seen some videos of the drifting mage, where the mage will try to run to you on a map, and instead of running to you, it runs right past you and ends up in a big circle where it runs around. A lot of times this is funny. Sometimes it can screw you over. There are some fixes for this, and the more you play this build, you'll start to kind of become a skeleton whisperer, and understand minion AI. There's some ways when it goes a little crazy, you can walk over and step on it and sit there for a minute, and it kind of resets the AI. Also, if you manage to get minion teleport, that resets it too, because it pulls you to where you are and immediately it finds a new target. We're using Last Steps of the Living, so it's kind of hard to get that, but there is another option up here in the mage tree with Skeleport, Grave Passage. The minion AI can be a little frustrating. There are ways to work around it, and I would say about 50% of the time I'm laughing at it anyway, so it can end up with some pretty funny scenarios. And also, there's always the option to use the A key by default to move your minion where you want it to be, like this, or make it target the target you want it to target. Con number 3. Good sustain requires low life build, or low life gear. So historically, this is a build that I've played for the last couple years, and historically one of the issues with this build was it's always had a really hard time with sustain. Even how I used to run this before Chaos Bolts was we would use Rip Blood with targets your minions, maxing out your intelligence as best as you can for all of the health, and if you got chunked for a lot of your HP, it would be very difficult to gain all of this HP back quickly. Luckily, with how strong low life is right now, that kind of circumvents that problem. Anytime you take a big hit, as long as you can like back away for a second, you start to get your health back through ward. So that is one of the downsides of that, is you do actually need the low life stuff to set up, but that's not much of a problem until later on when you're pushing empowered and starting to push your corruption some. Leveling through campaign and up to that point, you're just fine using a health setup with some, like, sneak some endurance into your gear. Once you're low life, you won't need that endurance anymore, but it does help for a little bit of damage reduction until you swap over to a low life build. But to have your sustain fully online, you will want to be low life through Exsanguinous, Last Steps of the Living, percent of missing health gained as ward per second on the gloves, the experimental affix. But that comes online a little bit later once you start to gather the pieces for that. Misusing cooldown significantly loses damage. Mainly what I mean by this is your Dreadshade has an 18-second cooldown, and a lot of your mage's damage is coming from the Dreadshade. You see. So there are scenarios where you're running Monolith and you summon 5 Ice Beetles from a shrine, and you accidentally put your Dreadshade on an Ice Beetle instead of your Skeleton Mage. Does not feel great. You're running around like a headless chicken waiting for this Dreadshade cooldown to come back. Another thing you can do is, if your mage is about to die, your mage has just a sliver of HP left, and you put the Dreadshade on, and there's not enough time for it to leech back up, and your mage gets killed, you're also waiting for the Dreadshade. Over time, as you play with this build, you start to get better with that, where you can anticipate scenarios where your mage might die, and you think, like, okay, I'm going to hold on to my Dreadshade for a few seconds. I'm going to let this boss telegraph hit my mage, and then I'll resummon it, and then I'll use the Dreadshade. The more you play this build, the more comfortable you get. But the times that you don't have the Dreadshade because you mess something up, the damage is not as great, so it doesn't feel good. So that would be one of the main cons. That's something that you can encounter pretty often until you get more used to playing that build, or this build. We can talk about skills real quick. Summon Skeleton Mage. Number 1 priority when you're first setting this build up, you want to get your Cryomancer going. There's a lot of... You want Cryomancer in particular because you're getting the cold damage from this, and Cold Pin, scaling from Lich's Scorn. Get your Cryomancer. Remove mages from the pool, so whenever you're in a pinch and you have to resummon your mage quickly, you're not going to accidentally resummon just a basic mage with Hungering Souls, and then throw all your buffs onto that, and then have to wait until all that stuff's off cooldown. You just want to be able to reliably get your Cryomancer out. Second step, go for your Archmage. This makes it so instead of having a bunch of small squishy mages, we have one big mage with 130% more damage and health, bigger size, double extra projectiles. And you want to set this up, and then that way all of your buffs are going onto one target. Third step is getting this crit of this healing on crit, 15% maximum health gained on crit. Whenever you're transitioning into this build out of the leveling build, these are the 3 things you want to get first. So if you're using Bone Golem or whatever else, keep that around until you have these 3 things set up. And then from that point on, the rest of the mage is damage stuff. Usually what I like to run for first is getting all of these extra projectiles. That way your AoE is more consistent. You're not just always firing a single bolt every other hit. Get your cone set up. Step 2, get your spell damage maxed. And then finally, the final stages of the mage, when you're starting to get geared up and getting max mana on your gear, this is where you want to start taking this more damage per max mana. And increased level of Skeletal Mage is pretty nice on this build. It lets you go 5 out of 5 on your max mana, so try to get tier 5 plus the Skeletal Mage just so you can cap this node out. And then if you get any more than that with +3 or +4, tier 6 or tier 7, you put it into Frenzy. That way your mage is getting frenzied and getting more cast speed. Feels really good. That's basically how this mage works. Next step, Dreadshade. Dreadshade is going to be where the majority of your damage is coming from. You want to come down here, get the flat damage here, get the more damage here, and then in the bottom right, you want to get this, Egoism, which makes your minion always crit. Pretty much once you get that set up, your mage is almost good to go, but you need one more thing, and that is to come up here to Lone Watcher, and Lone Watcher makes it so your Dreadshade isn't draining health, it's just making your mage take increased damage. And once you have this, your mage is pretty stable. You're getting your healings from crits, you're getting more damage, pretty much everything from this on, and the Dreadshade tree is just pushing your mage's damage. And we do that through 2 things. Going down here, getting some attack speed, and then getting this Blind Fury as soon as you can. Basically, this is a big boost of cast speed for your mage, 40%, but it blinds your minion. And basically what this does is while your minion's blind, he'll be aiming at a target, and sometimes it'll turn and aim in the opposite direction. But since our attack is a big range of projectiles, even when it turns to hit another enemy, the intended target is still getting clipped by your cone. So it's not really a big downside for this. Actually, you won't even notice it at all, but what you will notice is the 40% cast speed, because your mage will be going berserk through echoes or on bosses, whatever you want. This, you get more damage here for the mage, which is good, scaling your mage's damage, and then whatever points you have left, you're picking up the rest of this cast speed down here, more flat damage here, and then increased buff effect per missing health. Your mage doesn't lose health often, it pretty much stays topped up with this healing from Grey Merchant, but in the times where it does drop low, it's getting, all the Dreadshade buffs are getting boosted by a little bit through this Flesh Harvest. Step 3, Infernal Shade. This is pretty much the final piece that's really going to make your mage go crazy in your maps. It's really easy to set up the Infernal Shade because you don't need a lot of points. You basically just have to come down here, make it so you can put it on minions, go down this way, make it so it's unlimited duration on minions, and then you grab this up here for 12% move speed, attack speed, and cast speed, but it stacks for the longer that the Infernal Shade stays on the minion, up to 72%, which is really strong. 72% cast speed and move speed. You can kind of see your mage is going to be going absolutely crazy through the maps, and if that wasn't enough, you can grab haste too, so your mage always is hasted. Some other things you can do, Infernal Shade from this point, what I do is grab slow, so you have a way to any enemies that close in on your mage get slowed when it's getting hit by the Infernal Shade surrounding it. What you can generally do is increase the area through this node. If you're having trouble with your mage dying because Infernal Shade is doing too much damage early on before you have a lot of minion health, you can take these nodes out and put them into mana efficiency for now. That's what I'm doing. As you get higher level, your mage will have more base health. As you get minion health on gear, your mage is going to have more health, and you can sustain this. And basically the point of that is to give it a bigger area, so you're slowing enemies in a bigger area around your mage. But really the critical part of Infernal Shade is just this minion section over here, getting this all maxed out first. The final thing that buffs this mage is Chaos Bolts. Chaos Bolts is a really nice addition from the Warlock stuff that came out that synergizes really well with the mana stacking style of this build. You just go over here to Revolution, and that's giving you flat damage and a cast speed for your mage for all the max every 20 max mana. You have this 1 extra flat damage, which minion flat damage is kind of rare to come by in this. We're getting it from Lich's Scorn and our suffixes on Skeletal Scepter, but other than that, there's not too many ways. You usually have to do that through some kind of skill synergies or unique items. So getting it on Chaos Bolt and being able to scale it with your mana is quite nice. And then for a little bit of extra utility on Chaos Bolt, you can convert it to cold and then take this node down here that makes any ailment chance from your Chaos Bolt tree, Damned, Ignite, Bleed, or Frostbite. When you hit your mage with the Chaos Bolt, it inherits those stats. And so from that point, we up this Ignite chance, which is being converted to Frostbite, and then your mage is doing a little bit of extra cold dot on top of that with more of a chance to freeze the enemies it's attacking. Really, the most important part up here is the scaling, and then the Frostbite stuff over here is a nice additional touch for the mage. Then finally, our utility is coming from Transplant. Most important part of Transplant, there's 2 of them. Getting your bone armor set up. This is like the primary defense for Acolyte or Necromancer specifically. Necromancer doesn't have a lot for defensive buffs other than bone armor. So you want your bone armor maxed out, increased effects, increased duration all the way. And then also you get Haste and Frenzy. Really nice to have an on-demand Haste and Frenzy for yourself every 4.3 seconds or less. And then finally the kill threshold. It's really good when you're like fighting bosses, for example, and you drop them to 15% HP. You can just execute them straight off. And that's pretty much how this build all works together. Buff up your mage, drag it through maps behind you, and I'll do an echo at the end and kind of talk you through how I'm playing it when I'm running through these echoes. But yeah, that's that. If you ever end up in trouble, bone armor, or transplant for the bone armor, escape. If you're just running through echoes, use the transplant for haste. Just keep moving, drag this thing behind you, and let it go berserk. That's the skills for this build. Alright, let's go a little bit over the passives now. The passives for this build are pretty standard, pretty cookie cutter, but there are a few options that you can tweak, and I'll go over those too. But let's talk about what each of these passives kind of does for the build. Forbidden Knowledge and Unnatural Preservation in the Natural Acolyte tree just gives you pretty much capture necrotic res, and gives you enough poison res that 1 suffix can get you pretty much all the way to cap, and then you can get that the rest of the way by sealing poison res on a suffix somewhere. Minion cast speed is really good for your mage. This is the base Acolyte tree. Next we'll go into Necromancer. Minion health, you can swap this out for minion cast speed here, but I like having the extra health and armor as just like an extra padding to keep your mage alive. Next, you want to grab this Armor Shred here. Armor Shred's going to help your mage take out single targets better. When your mage is attacking a single target on its own, and you're not really helping it too much, this right here with all of its attack speed and cast speed is enough to get about 20 Armor Shred stacks, which helps with the single target damage. Obviously, if you have Armor Shred on your gear too, you can kind of help it out. Ward Retention here to help build your ward pool bigger once you transition over to the low life. More damage, minion fire and necrotic, and you might be thinking, wait, my mage is a cold mage. Well, luckily a lot of the more damage nodes you're getting are generic more, so really any flat damage that your mage has is getting scaled as part of the bigger pool. So we don't really care that it's not cold. Any flat damage is just getting scaled by the more in general, and it's not like more cold damage, it's just straight up more damage. And so these flat damages here can do quite well to boost your mage's damage further. Cast speed here for your minion, anywhere you can get cast speed. It's important to note that the mage's Ice Shard skill scales with cast speed, not attack speed. That's what we're looking for. Cast speed here means it's attacking more often. Critical strike, you might see this and think, hey, my mage always crits, I don't need the critical strike chance. What's important from here is the minion leech and leeching from crits, and this makes it so even if your mage isn't, or even if between your mage's attacks where it's getting the 15% health back, there's also a little bit of leech going on in there in the background, so it's not as stop and starty getting that health back. This kind of just keeps a rolling flow of HP back to your mage. Necrotic and elemental resistance for your character. The LA res, you take this and it kind of gets your stats the rest of the way to cap. This means, for example, the ruby ring that Ribbons of Blood comes on has fire resistance already on the prefix. And if you get like a 40-45% roll on that, this elemental res gets you the rest of the way. And it's the same for the cold and lightning too. You can get cold resistance on a suffix, lightning resistance on a suffix. This node gets you the rest of the way to cap. And in addition to this, it's scaling your minions elemental and the necrotic damage it's going to be getting from here. I just think the res is really nice because you don't have to devote 2 suffixes to a resistance, at least the elemental resistances. Up here, minion crit multi is really good. It's making your mage's crits, basically all of the attacks it does, do even more damage. Your mage applies chill reliably. It's nice to have a source of chill in your build just tied into your main damage source. And this is scaling the cold damage. And we can take a look at Warlock here. At some point early on, after you pick up Dreadshade, you bounce over to the Warlock tree to pick up Chaos Bolts around level 50-ish. Or maybe a little bit earlier, 50 you get your last skill specialization. But anyway, some point early on, you're going to take these 5 points just to get the Chaos Bolt, whenever that feels comfortable to you. And that lets you start scaling your Skeleton Mage with your max mana. And later on, we come here for Occultist Mind to get extra mana based on your intelligence, and that's going to ramp up your mana scaling even further. Lich Tree, we grab Apocrypha, which is more intelligence and increased mana regen. There is intelligence up here, but you don't really need the crit tied to this, and you don't need those points either to get further up into the tree. So this intelligence combined with the mana regen is a nice little extra boost to help sustain the Chaos Bolts if you get a little spammy. Trying to stack debuffs, helping your mage apply armor shreds and frailty. If you get a bit spammy with the Chaos Bolts, this mana regen from the Lich Tree helps you bounce back from that a lot more than this crit would do for you. I also take the increased health here. This is where you get into some options with Skeleton Mage. So when you first start out with the Skeleton Mage build and you're a bit lower level, you might notice your mage doesn't have quite as high of a health pool, and so if you spend a lot of time getting from pack to pack in an echo, your mage might die a lot between packs. And the overall fix for this is getting some minion health on prefixes, and also just player levels is the biggest thing, because every time you get a player level, your mage gets 1 more or 5 more flat HP, and then this is scaled by all of your minion health. So in the process of trying to level, you might find that your mage has a bit of a smaller health pool. You can flex points down here into Mortal Tether, which is giving you 15% minion health per point. If you don't need the rest cap yet, or if you don't feel like you're taking a lot of damage, flex some points out of this resistance down here, flex some points out of this health down here, and as you level up and your mage starts to feel a bit more stable, you can take these points back out and then put them back into the player health or the resistances. Some other things you can do instead of this health, this increased health scales harder the more HP you already have. Something you can do, which I'm doing right now, is instead of taking this increased health, my health pool is kind of small because I've had a little bit of a hard time finding hybrid health on my pieces where I can work it in. Something else you can do is move these points over into more intelligence, and this is giving you 4% ward retention per point, and then it's also giving you your mage more cold penetration. So the ward retention, if you don't have a lot of health getting scaled by this increased health, you don't really lose too much ward. By swapping these 4 points back into increased health, I lose about 200 ward. In exchange for that, my Skeleton Mage gets 4% more damage because of the cold pin from Lich's Scorn. And then also 16% increased damage for the mage just because how the mage scales with intelligence. So if you don't have a big HP pool yet and you're kind of just getting into end game, you can kind of mess around with going a more glass cannon-y style. You're not really that much less tanky. You lose like a little bit of ward. As your HP pool starts to scale, though, you might look at going back into this increased health, because that's going to scale your health pool higher. And the higher your health, the more ward per second you're getting from the missing health from your low life setup. So that's pretty much it for the passives. Really, it's, like I said, all pretty cookie cutter. The two things that you might swap are going into more minion health early to keep your mage alive for a longer period of time until you level up. And then also there's stuff you can do here with shuffling around increased health into int where you can find it, and you're kind of trading off the health for more damage for your mage and some ward retention. You kind of take a step back, but your damage goes up further. So those are some options that you can swap out here. That's the passives. Alright, let's talk a little bit about gearing now. Your damage scaling sources in this build are flat mana and intelligence, and minion spell damage. There are two different suffixes you can have. Minion spell and bow damage, and minion melee and spell damage. We get both of those because we're a spell minion, and so you're doubling up on the flat damage there. This new addition to crafting for minion affixes is really nice. It makes this build very powerful. Your weapon, you can get a lot of juice out of this, and then also later on, you try to seal on the cold penetration for a little bit more damage there. When you're just starting out leveling this build, you're trying to get all your defenses covered first. You want to try to get on any gear piece that has a lot of defense, like what's a good example? Chest piece here, getting your increased armor, increased health on that, hybrid health, and increased health on belt. Whenever there's an option where your defenses are very heavy onto a piece of gear, you want to try to get your defenses covered first. And this is while you're leveling through campaign and starting to get into the monolith system. Aim to get your defenses covered first. Movement speed and hybrid health if you're always moving. It's a lot harder to get hit by telegraphs, which preserves your life. Hybrid health on gloves, hybrid health on belts. Getting your critical strike avoidance capped. You can do this with two suffixes on rings, and then also somewhere else like boots or helmet or gloves, wherever you can fit it, until later on when you get the crit avoidance blessing from Reign of Dragons timeline. So crit avoidance capped, stacking health where you can get it. Make sure your defenses and reses are pretty good. Keep in mind you're getting resistances from the Acolyte base tree is pretty much covering all of your necrotic res, giving you poison res, getting more poison res from this specific base, getting elemental res from higher up into the Necromancer passive tree. Yeah, so work on getting your defenses covered. And you're doing this as a health build while you're acquiring the pieces to form this the low life setup. So keep an eye out for Exsanguinous, keep an eye out for your Last Steps of the Living by farming the Blood, Frost, and Death timeline, which also has unique echoes for chest pieces. And while you're doing all this, kill exiled mages because you're trying to get a good roll of percent of current health lost gained as ward, or percent of missing health gained as ward. Basically, you're staying as a life build until you get the 3 pieces of this and you can transition into low life. And so that's pretty much how your defensive setups are working. And once you get into the low life setup, you're trying to make sure you can get health wherever you can. So hybrid health on gloves, hybrid health on belt, increased health on belt, increased health on helmet. Try to scale your health pool so you're getting more ward back from this percent of missing health gained as ward affix that is on chest boots belt, or chest boots gloves, I mean. That's basically what your defensives revolve around. Blessings, you can get void res from blessing. This frees up so you don't have to use Crusader gauntlets with the void res on the implicit, and we can take the mana gloves instead for damage scaling. Mana also scales your damage. Also physical res blessing, so you don't have to put 2 physical res suffixes on your gear. That frees you up for swapping in some of these uniques like Ribbons of Blood. Then you can keep your resistances kind of confined to your relic and your rings. That way you save your suffixes on the other pieces for important stuff like hybrid health, chance to apply frailty, crit avoidance, the 1 crit avoidance you need here. Anyway, that's what your early leveling into monolith setup looks like until you can switch to low life. About this point is when you're going to start focusing more on damage. So to take a look at damage, like I said earlier, minion spell damage, extremely strong for this build. It's a hard stat to get outside of certain items and outside of your skill trees. So being able to craft this now onto your scepter is extremely strong. Intelligence, wherever you can get it, is scaling your Lich's Scorn, the penetration, the cold pin you get. Think of cold pin as more damage for your mage. It's multiplicative, scaling all of your base stats, and then getting flat mana where you can get it. Helmet. There's a new mana prefix for scepters, which is really nice to get it, or to get there. Intelligence and mana on gloves. That's pretty much it. Once your defenses are covered, you're just pushing health, int, and mana wherever you can get it. And try to get your flat damage on the scepter there. That's for your weapon. The spell damage is critical. you're going to get a bunch of scaling from the minion spell damage on Scepter, so try to get those two for your weapon in particular. That's very important. But that's basically it for the gearing strategy. Focus on your health, resistances, crit avoidance, acquire, exsanguinous, last steps of the living, and I actually have in the guide here how to farm for that kind of stuff in the milestones section. And you get your low life setup, and then from there you can start pumping up your damage through int and mana wherever you can squeeze it. Also, to help alleviate a little bit of the pressure on your minion's health, later on you can try to get Death Rattle with LP and put minion health there. Minion health on Ribbons of Blood is good too. Death Rattle and Ribbons of Blood are both common items, so it's pretty easy to farm for a couple LP on those. Ribbons of Blood, you just target farm the Abomination on Fall of the Outcast timeline. And Death Rattle is a pretty common general drop. You can target unique amulet blessings and try to find a Death Rattle with LP. And you can get minion health there and start to move some of the minion health out of your passive tree into more offensive stats like intelligence, or into increased health to kind of scale the ward you're getting back from missing health. That's the gearing strategy for this build. All right, next let's go over the blessings and idols for this build. We'll start with the Black Sun timeline. There's a couple options here. Void Res is what I'm taking in this build, because taking Void Res from Black Sun timeline allows you freedom on what gloves base you're using. So if you don't have the high roll on Void Res Blessing here, you have to take Crusader's Gauntlets for the Void Res implicit, and then you have to put Void Res somewhere else on a suffix, or you can double up and take 2 Void Res suffixes somewhere, but that's not efficient. So what we would rather do is take the Void Res Blessing here, and then we can run Mana Gloves for damage scaling for the build and just put Void Res on some other suffix somewhere to cover the gap. But what we would rather do is take the Void Res Blessing here and farm for a high roll, and then that way we're free to have an open suffix that's not being taken up by Void Res, and we can also take the mana based gloves for damage scaling on this build. Another option while you're leveling up to Empowered is to just take the health here, because the health pool is helping to scale your ward when you switch over to a low life build. But you eventually want to try to get this Void Res to kind of min-max your build a bit and open up some of the gear pressure. Second, the best blessing you can get from Lagon timeline is mana. You don't want to take Lightning Res or anything like that, because we can just cover Lightning Res with 1 suffix plus the Necromancer passives, and so we can just go take the efficient option here and grab the mana blessing. Crit avoidance from Reign of Dragons timeline. Getting a high roll on this means that you can cap your crit avoidance with 1 suffix, either on a ring here or trying to seal a crit avoidance onto a Ribbons of Blood. You have some options there on what you can seal on your rings and amulets. So crit avoidance, very strong for that, because then instead of devoting 3 suffixes to your crit avoidance or reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes, you can just get crit avoidance here, crit avoidance on ring, and you're capped. Physical res from the Reign of Winter timeline. Getting your physical res there, same thing as the Void Res, except you don't have a good physical res blessings, or a good physical res implicit to use. So you would be using most likely 2 physical resistance suffixes. We can kind of just circumvent that completely by getting a high roll physical res blessing. If you manage to get like a tier 7 physical res somewhere that's high roll, you can swap this blessing out for increased armor, which is really nice for just scaling your defenses a bit further. That really just depends on your ability to find a tier 7 and maybe getting it onto this ring slot here, sealing it onto this ring. And then finally the flat armor from Spirits of Fire timeline. That's your blessings. Next, the idols. The idols on this build are super straightforward. Percent increased health and flat health wherever you can get it. We're using 3 large idols. The only exception to that rule, percent increased health and flat health, is you want one of these with chance for minion to mark for death on hit, and that makes it so your Roid Mage can curse enemies to take more damage by lowering their resistances. And then also you want one here with fear, and that makes it so you can kind of apply a little CC yourself by fearing on your Chaos Bolts hit. If you get swarmed by a pack or something, just drop some Chaos Bolts, and then you have a chance to make the enemy scatter for a second and kind of give your mage a second to burn those packs down. But other than that, you're looking for increased health and flat health. Another option that you might find here is ward retention on the suffix, and this is kind of something you can play around with. While you're looking for better versions of these idols, you could try to swap in some of the ones with ward retention and see if it's giving you a higher ward pool than whatever your currently equipped idol is. And this is another option you can work in while you're hunting for these idols to increase your health pool. But that's that for idols. Pretty straightforward there. Alright, I'm going to do a quick echo here at 200 corruption just to kind of walk you guys through what my mindset is when I'm doing echoes, and walk you through some of the traps that might happen. Basically, echo start, get your mage out, new Infernal Shade, new Dread Shade, get your Chaos Bolts buff. Minion AI can get a little crazy. I noticed that one of the main triggers for that is when you get a large distance between you and your mage. So if your mage is back there attacking stuff, and you start transplanting far away, when it tries to catch up, that's usually when the drifting starts. If that ever happens, just run back and stand on your mage like this, help it find a new target for a second, and you're good to go. One of the things I do to prevent this is when you're going through a map, you can transplant just a short distance in front of you to have the haste. That way you're still going a little quickly. But if you go at a walking pace, generally what happens here, make sure you keep your buffs up. Generally what happens, the minions or the enemies come and group up around your character. Mage comes and catches up and then starts blasting. Some scenarios like this where you're fighting targets at a different elevation, you have to use your A to make your minion move, A key by default, to reposition it. You can also make it attack high priority targets. If you're fighting something like an abomination, or I mean profane flesh, and it's throwing boulders at you, switch your mage to that target. Make sure it's aiming for the big things that are deadly on the screen. You can do that. But yeah, just keep moving through the echoes. Sometimes if your mage is taking a lot of damage from the Infernal Shade, you can recast the Infernal Shade to start the attack speed and cast speed buff over, which means it's doing less damage then. Something else I like to do is when I see Dread Shades on cooldown, my mage is back there dropping, I like to hold on to my Dread Shade cooldown, engage a pack, and then just resummon the mage too. It's nice. The important part is, if your mage is going to die, you want it to be on your terms. Having your mage die, or because it's like you're running into another pack and it doesn't have anything to attack, just resummon it. You want to be in control of when your mage gets resummoned. So if you can, hold on to your Dread Shade cooldown and kind of play around that a little bit. But other than that, this is what the gameplay looks like. You're just walking through the map, keeping your buffs up. And when I'm explaining through it, it sounds like a lot, but really it's a pretty lazy build to play. You don't have too much to worry about. Just dodge telegraphs, pick up loot, make sure your mage has something to kill. And that's your strategy for going through echoes. Quickly at the end here, I wanted to go over some of the frequently asked questions I get for this build. Starting out, what do I do if my mage is dying a lot, or my mage is dying a lot? Can you please help? Your mage's survivability scales quite a lot as you're leveling up as a player. So basically, you need to find ways to mitigate some of that volatility of the mage until you get higher level. Every time you level, your mage gets 5 more base health, and then that's scaling with all your minion health. So eventually you just reach a sweet spot when it's stable. But what can you do until then? So one thing, the longer the Infernal Shade is on your mage, the more damage it does, up to a cap. So something you can do if your mage is dying a lot is just refresh your Infernal Shade. Your buffs start back down to where they are at the beginning and then scale up from there, but that's one option you can do. Option 2, with your passives, you can swap points out of the increased health or the resistance. If you're resistance capped or not too worried about the damage you're taking, you can move points over here into Mortal Tether to get the minion HP and use that as a crutch for a little bit. Another option you can do is just make sure you're getting minion health prefixes on some of your gear. Amulet and rings are good options for that. Belt also a good option for minion health. And basically, as you level up, you'll need less and less of these fixes. You can slowly move your passives back to the damage stats. Clear off some of your minion health with putting uniques in those slots, for example. Basically, anything you can do to get to a higher level and make that comfy for you. And as you play the build more too, you'll find better opportunities on when you can summon your mage, resummon your mage to refresh the buffs and make it not take damage, or holding onto your Dread Shade cooldown so you don't end up in situations where you're waiting to resummon and buff your mage. Those are some options for if your minion's dying a lot. mainly just use these crutches until you're a bit higher level. Between 75 and 85 is where you'll start to feel it kind of stabilize a bit, and your minion health from there will start to scale up. Second question I get, what about X weapon? Why not X weapon? What about X weapon compared to this weapon? So right now with the new minion stats that you can craft on your weapon, the flat spell damage on both suffixes and the cold pin for minions and the mana here, like on the scepter, these are all very solid damage stats for your mage. The spell damage in particular is kind of a rare stat because you can only get it from like baked into skill trees or interactions between skills. You can't really craft this on gear outside of the helmet implicit. So a crafted weapon is going to be the biggest bang for your buck in terms of stats that are scaling your damage very far. So you've got the flat damage as your base here, the cold pin as a multiplicative damage source, and same with the mana, also a multiplicative source. And you can get 4 out of your 5 stats on your scepter, all extremely efficient damage stats for your mage. And a crafted weapon, I don't think compares to really anything else currently in the game in terms of the damage output that this gives your mage, but feel free to experiment. Another question I get a lot is, how does this build compare to Wraiths or Golems? I would say out of all the Necromancer builds, Wraiths far and away is the best boss killer. And this is because nothing can really compete with all of the your Wraith cluster all hitting one boss with armor shred stacks. It makes an extremely strong single target. The Golem build and the Roid Mage build can also do bosses, but not to that extreme. Roid Mage build, for example, takes a little bit of specialized gear where you have to lean a bit more into the minion health pool. That way, you're, for example, like tier 4 Jewelra, the rotating beams, your mage needs to be able to survive 2 of those hits and leech back up. This bossing on this build takes a little bit more minion health. In terms of mapping, it's going to come down to player preference. Obviously, the Wraiths are still strong in mapping, but there's a lot of move and setup unless you're using like a teleport, the minion teleport boots. This build, you put your buffs on, you don't have to think about it again. You just walk through the map. Obviously, there's some downsides if you run into maps with not a lot of density and you're running between like large stretches. Sometimes your mage will die because it can't find anything to kill to leech back up. In my personal opinion, I feel like Roid Mage is a very hands-off and you don't have to think about it too much mapper, but really it's going to come down to personal preference, what you want to play. Golem, you don't have to worry about that dying as much, but it's a bit more of an active play style with spamming your Rip Bloods onto your Golem to cause retaliate. See which one of those sounds good to you and mess around with it, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to all come down to player preference, what you want to play. I think the strengths of this build is that it's very hands-off once you put your buffs on, and you can pretty much just walk through and give this thing a target and it's going to shred the target. And it can do bosses too with a little bit of investment, so I think this is kind of just a good all-around build. But I encourage you to try them all and see for yourself. At the end of the day, like I said, it's just going to be personal preference.